Hello, my name is John Burris. I'd like to thank you for watching this short video I have today for you. This is called the Core Myth video. In this short video I will be explaining the nature of the core, the false narratives around the core, how society has basically given us a false impression of what the core actually is. And I'll show you all kinds of new ways to see the human body. In a way, many of the ideas that we're currently following are what's called false narratives. And we follow them religiously. And maybe it's time to rethink what our human anatomy is all about. So today in the Core Myth, I'll be explaining how the body actually works. So a little bit about my background. I've been in the health and wellness business for over 35 years now. And I'm a fascia body worker. I'm a yoga therapist, yoga teacher. I've written books, travel around the world teaching anatomy conferences, and overall just exploring how anatomy really works. I've also had my own aches and pains I had to deal with over my lifetime, spending 35 years doing the wrong things to cure back problems. So I'm going to show you why most of us are leading a false narrative about our anatomy and doing the wrong things, especially if you have back problems. We've been taught the wrong things, so I'm going to show you how the anatomy of the body really works, and we'll explore the core from the inside out. So thank you for joining me. Let's begin. It'd be very difficult to go through society and not hear about the core. We hear about it from the media, personal trainers, physical therapists, medical doctors, and we're taught over and over again we need to strengthen our core. Strengthen our core to support our back, to hold us upright. And this is the current model that's practiced in gymnasiums, in physical therapy offices, and all throughout the land. And I'm here to tell you, maybe we want to rethink that idea, because it's a false narrative that, first of all, it doesn't work, and second of all, it actually could be doing more harm than good. But most of us have heard of that idea, and I'm here to show you a whole different way to see the body. So what is the core anyways? So part of it is it's a misinterpretation of our own human anatomy. The abdominal muscles that most people are strengthening, they're the lower torso muscles. From the pubic bone to the neck is called the trunk of the body. And the abdominal muscles that people are taught to strengthen are in the trunk of the body, not in the core of the body. So let me show you a picture of how this works. The abdominal muscles consist of the internal obliques, the external obliques, the transverse abdominis, and the rectus abdominis. And they're at the lower portion of the trunk of the body. So the trunk of the body, from the pubic bone through the neck, that's what people are strengthening. It's not the core of the body. They're strengthening, they're tightening, they're hardening their trunk muscles, the lower portion. So here's where it gets really tricky. The muscles in the lower part of the body are connected to the muscles in the fascia in the upper part of the body, all the way to the neck and behind the ear and the top of the head. It doesn't stop. It doesn't just all of a sudden dissipate. So if you're tightening and you're shortening the lower trunk muscles, which is what people call the core, guess what? You're also creating neck problems. You're rolling your shoulders forward and you're rounding your back because it's called the front line of the body. So from the pubic bone to the neck, we call it in the body work movement therapy world the front line of the body. When you shorten your lower trunk muscles, you are shortening the front of the body. And that has pretty dire consequences. Let me show you what could happen over time if this is what you do over time. Here's the front line of the body. It's a continuous line of fascia and muscles that run, at least the upper part of it anyways, from the pubic bone to the chin up to the ear and the top of the head. It doesn't stop. When you shorten the trunk muscles, which is what people do in their core exercises, you're shortening the front line of the body. It causes the body to round forward, the shoulders to roll forward, and most people who do a lot of core exercises, I call them, also have neck problems because they're tightening up their neck at the same time. Now here's what happens in the long run. For people who spent years or decades shortening the front line of the body, they end up with a rounded back, like in this picture. Their shoulders roll forward, they shrink in height, they compress the front of the body, and the back of the body rounds. So excessive core strengthening work or shortening the front line of the body will cause a rounded back, and sometimes people get a hump in the back called a dowager's hump. It's all because the front line of the body is being shortened. Most people doing core work will have that happen over time. Now here's another interesting idea to consider. Here's the picture of a tree. On the outside is the bark, and there's several rings. In the tree's lifetime, every year it grows a new ring. And what's at the very center of the tree? The core. The core is where the lifeblood of the tree is. That's where the tree's nutrients start from. And it expands outward. Yet, when people do abdominal work in our culture, they're not working at their core like a tree. They're working on the outside where the bark is, because the abdominal muscles are on the outside of the body. They're where the bark would be in a tree. They're not at the core of the body where a tree's actual core is. So the whole concept of core work is a fabrication of a false narrative. It doesn't exist. When you're doing abdominal work, you're not doing core work. You're doing lower trunk work. Trees have a core. Now we do have a core, and I'll teach you about that in a minute. But it's not where you think it is. If you're doing stomach exercises, you're not really doing core work. Now, here's where things get to be very interesting. Most of us were taught to believe that in order to protect or cure our back, we need to strengthen our core. And that's what most people are doing. And I'm here to tell you that at first it doesn't work. And it only makes things worse because it comes from a false narrative about how the human body actually works. So let me explain this to you, and hopefully it turns a light bulb on for you. So most of us were taught to believe that the human body is a column of blocks stacked on top of each other. And this theory is based on gravity. Gravity is pulling us down. We need to strengthen our core, strengthen our back, and that's supposed to protect us. Well, guess what? We're not a column. The body is not a column. Buildings are built like a column. You see columns that hold the roof up, and they're supposed to be straight so they don't fall down. But that's not who we are. We're not a column. So if I look at the human skeleton here, we're taught to believe that our bones are holding us up because we're a column that needs to be strengthened. We're taught to believe our spine and our rib cage are like a pillar that needs to be strengthened. Our core needs to be strengthened to protect our back and hold us up. Well, guess what? It's not true. That's not who we are. So this notion that our spine, all the vertebrae along the pathway, need to be strengthened by the muscles around them to hold us up. That's a false narrative. That's not who we are. We are not a column. Your core does not need to be strengthened. You do not need to harden your abdominal muscles. That's a false narrative because we're not a column. What we are instead, we are a tensegrity model. The tensegrity model is a collection of cables and pulleys that are pulling every which way in the body. And that's made out of the muscles and the fascia tissue, pulling left and right and up and down, and it's causing the vertebrae to create the right space between them. So we're designed like a tensegrity model, and we're not designed as a column. The column theory is not correct. That's where most people are getting lost by following the column theory. We're a series of cables and pulleys that need to be lengthened and toned but not tightened because we are not a column. So that's the first thing we need to think about is who's ever teaching us anatomy got it wrong. We're not a column. We're a series of cables and pulleys. You know, columns are for buildings. When was the last time you saw a building walking around? Buildings can't move because they're stationary. Well, tensegrity models move. Human beings move because we're flexible. and we move in and out because we're built on muscles and fascia tissue that's supposed to be toned and flexible. This is the current model that we all practice. This is the model of blocks. We're a bunch of blocks stacked on top of us because our medical doctors, physical therapists, personal trainers, and many other people in the health and wellness business are teaching us the body is a series of blocks that need to be strengthened and hardened, especially your core. That is a false analogy. The human body is not a collection of blocks stacked on top of each other. Another way I like to think about the human body is a circus tent. The circus tent is not held up by columns, it's held up by tension. The cables and ropes pulling left and right and out to the side are pulling the tent upwards. That's how the human body is designed. There's no core in this picture. There's no core in the tent. There's no structure. It's all based on tension, cables and pulleys pulling in all directions. That's how the human body exists. Here's another way to think about the spine. All the cables and pulleys in the soft tissue around the spine are pulling the vertebrae away from each other. When you harden your abdominal muscles and your other muscles, you are shortening those cables. So the spine, for example, is a series of cables and pulleys that pull the bones away from each other, not a pillar or a column as we're taught to believe. And here's another way to imagine the body. Here's a picture of a suspension bridge. It's not the columns or pillars of a suspension bridge holding the bridge up. It's the cables, the tension from the cables that actually hold the bridge up. So if it had too much tension, the bridge would snap. If it didn't have enough tension, the bridge would collapse. Not the columns or pillars holding it up. Just like the human body, we are a series of tension cables consisting of muscles and fascia tissue. And here's the comparison of the ideologies. The column theory that Western scientific medicine teaches, that we need to strengthen all the blocks and harden the blocks, or the more holistic model, that we're a series of cables and the tension is what's important and not strengthening anything. You want proper tone, but you want proper flexibility as well. So it's time to shift our model into what actually the body consists of. There's absolutely no reason to harden your core muscles, or what people call the lower trunk muscles, to protect your back, because it's a false narrative. In most cases, you're actually doing more harm. So here's the proper way to envision the human body. A series of cables and pulleys pulling every which direction. If you've got tension in your right foot, you might feel it in your right knee, your right hip, or all the way into your shoulder. If you have tension in your left hip, you could feel it in your neck, because the cables and pulleys are pulling every which way. And it makes no distinctions. It's just pulling in all different directions. So there's no column in the body. It's a series of cables and pulleys. That's why it's called the core myth. There really isn't such thing as a core, or we should not be tightening like we think we're supposed to be doing. So tensegrity is actually how we're held up. We're held up by tension to the fascia network, tension to the muscle network. It's not through a gravity-based column system. So we follow the proper anatomy. We want to lengthen and stretch the tension cables, not harden the body and harden the core. So there actually is a human core of the body, but it's not what most people think. For example, the quadratus lumborum muscle is at the core. It's right next to the spine. The psoas muscle, which goes from the groin all the way through the pelvis into the lower back. That's the human core right there. The problem is when people will tighten up their outer trunk muscles, their abdominal muscles, they inadvertently tighten up their true core muscles, which don't want to be tightened. This is the true form of back problems. Most often people have a tight psoas, a tight quadratus lumborum, and it's pulling on a disc or it's pulling on a nerve. And if it's already tight, why would you want to tighten up even more? So the current model teaches us you've already got a tight true core. Let's tighten up some more. Where's the logic in that? Now here's another model to consider. So let's say you're tightening up your, what people call the core, their lower trunk muscles. Well, the fascia and the muscles of the lower trunk goes all the way up to the neck and shoulders. It doesn't stop. So you're tightening up the lower part, the heart gets tight, the neck and throat get tight, and guess what else happens? Right in here, there's a long, flat muscle called the diaphragm. You might have heard of it before. It's the primary muscle of breathing. 80% of our breathing comes, or it's supposed to come, from our diaphragm. When you tighten up your lower abdominal muscles, you also tighten up your diaphragm, which inhibits breathing. And then what happens is you have to breathe from the upper chest muscles. That's called a breath of stress, because the diaphragm is the breath of relaxation. So tightening up your lower abdominal muscles cause the diaphragm to be too tight, and now you've got to have a stress breath breathe into your upper chest. So how logical is that? So there you have it. That's the true anatomy of the human anatomy. It's different than what most people are taught. It's often said if one bird flies in the wrong direction, many will follow. When it comes to our own human anatomy and fitness, that's what's happened. So through the course of fitness training and Pilates and bar and whatever name you give it, if you believe that you have to harden your core to protect your back, you have an errant way of thinking. That's not how the body works. So I had back pain for 35 years, and I strengthened my core, and I strengthened my hips, and I strengthened my back, and it never solved my problem. And all the thousands of people I've worked on and worked with on my bodywork table, same thing. The more they strengthened their core muscles, the worse their back became. Now, the pain may go away temporarily. It's like having a building that's leaning, you put duct tape around it. You haven't fixed the problem, you've just taken away the pain temporarily. So the narrative we're following is a false narrative. The actual way the body works is through tensegrity. What I had to do to heal my back muscles was stop doing all the obsessive core work. Do more yoga, more flexibility work, stretch my legs and hamstrings. Have a body worker work with me to stretch the length of the cable system, becoming more flexible. So in a way, culture is moving the wrong direction, but you have a chance right now to change that. This is the tipping point in your life, in our culture's life, to readdress how the body really works. So it's taken me nearly 40 years to get here through my own pain and suffering. I'm here to tell you that the core myth is just that, it's just a myth. It doesn't really exist how the body really wants to be. So thank you for joining me for this informative leading edge video. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can visit my website at johnburris.com. And please subscribe to my channel for more leading edge videos to come. Thank you so much.